Chapter 15. Hours slid by, but Ayianna couldn't tell how long they'd been hiking. Her legs and her back burned. She tried to ignore the hunger gnawing on her insides and focused instead on the impossible trail before her. The old trees continued to snag her attention. Their gnarled, twisted trunks towered above her. Their crooked limbs entwined with the next and closed in on her. She took deep breaths and tried to keep the familiar panic away. Liam nudged her hand. She ran her fingers through the silver fur. Her mind settled and the panic subsided for the moment. The lethargic forest seemed to pacify Desmond and Vian. They had finally stopped asking Cale when they would rest. Still, Ayianna heard occasional snippets of murmurs and complaints. An unnatural silence clutched the ancient forest and compressed the sounds of their progress. Cale hacked through the thorny vines, crisscrossing the path, and moved farther ahead. The broken vines swung in his wake. She raised her hands to deflect them, but they slipped through. Their thorns tore at her clothes and hands again. Tired and miserable, she blinked away the tears and pressed forward. She strained to see the path ahead of Cale. Nothing but inky blackness. His silhouette glided over the black stones with an eerie grace as he worked his way through another clump of vines. Silvery cobwebs swayed loosely among the trees like tattered curtains of the dead. Where were the spiders? How big would they be to create such large webs? Their thin fibers stuck to her face as she pushed through. After a while, she gave up trying to clean the sticky web from her hair and clothing. Ayianna's skin crawled. Something flickered to her right amid the thick trees. She peered into the forest. The darkness swallowed up the orb's glow like a black velvet cloak, leaving the shadows to her imagination. The trees crowded closer and closer together. Forward, backward, right or left, there was no way out. Panic clasped its clammy hand around her neck and suffocated her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Liam brushed against her leg, and Ayianna bent over, running her fingers through the wolf's fur. She exhaled slowly. "We will find our way out." "All right there, Ayianna," I asked Vian as he came up behind her. She glanced up. Cale had stopped, and everyone was staring at her. "We need to rest," Desmond said. "Can't you see she's exhausted?" Cale's jaw tightened as he eyed her. His gray eyes looked almost purple in the orange light. He didn't need another reason to detest her. She straightened. "No, I'm fine, really. Each step is a step closer, right?" She tried to smile, but the muscles in her face trembled. Instead, she clamped her mouth shut. "It shouldn't be much longer," Cale said. He turned away and continued on. "You've got a strong one there, Desmond," Vian said. Desmond smiled and clamped his hand on her shoulder, giving it a squeeze. This time, Ayianna managed a smile as warmth blossomed in her chest and filled her with energy. She could have walked another 100 miles. She hiked on with a little extra bounce in her step. She could do this. She'd show Cale and make Desmond proud. Her foot caught on a protruding root. She stumbled forward, landing on all fours like a dog. Her enthusiasm shriveled up like a prune. She pushed herself up from the trail and brushed the dirt off her scraped hands. Glancing up, she caught sight of a light in the distance. "Look!" Ayianna cried out. "A light!" Desmond peered into the trees. "I don't see anything. Maybe your eyes are playing tricks on you." "But it was right there!" She pointed where she had seen the faint flicker of a light, but it was gone now. She pushed her way through the vines and cobwebs to where Cale waited with the orb. Their trail had emptied into a clearing. "We can camp here," Vian said as he stepped out into the opening. Vian shook his head and took off for the other side of the clearing. "It's not safe." "This is ridiculous." Desmond dumped his bags on the ground. "We can't keep going like this." Ayianna glanced around at the puckered tree trunks twisting above them. She fingered the wood flute that hung from her neck. Did these trees have dryads as well? Were they watching them right now? "This way." Cale stepped back on the trail. "No," Desmond said, his voice resolute. "We will camp here tonight." "I agree." Vian limped up next to Desmond, rubbing his back. "We need the rest." Cale glared at them. "Saeed said to stick to the Najiso trail." But Desmond raised his finger. He didn't say anything about not taking a break, did he? Cale hesitated and then shook his head. He wouldn't expect us to traipse through this forest for a few days without resting, would he? Desmond crossed his arms. If you are so adamant. We are, Vian and Desmond said in unison. We will need firewood and plenty of it. Soon a fire blazed in the open space, its light bobbing up and down on the deformed trees. The darkness seemed to press in closer in its attempt to extinguish the flame. Ayianna closed her heavy eyes and leaned against Liam, her muscles burning. Only for a moment. The forest sang to her. Its ancient song was sad and weary. Sleep. Beneath it, a dull warning throbbed, demanding her to wake and fight. But the voices rose above it, weaving together life's colorful tapestry and song. The dark colors twined with light. Had she heard this song before? The faint strains of the melody pulled at her. The tapestry grew darker. Grief outweighed the joy. Life held no joy. It marched toward darkness to what end? Death. Bitterness stung her soul. What was the point? She surrendered, and her body succumbed to the forest's silent request. Sleep. In the shadows of her mind, something hunted her. Fear twisted her insides and muddled her thoughts. The forest song had ceased. Its thick silence crushed her. She gasped. Padded steps drew nearer and nearer. She tried to run, to move, but her limbs hung heavy and lifeless at her side. Her lungs constricted. She couldn't breathe. A twig snapped. Ayianna started. Her pulse pounded in her head, ripping her from the grip of her dream. She glanced around. The men were lounging around the fire, nibbling on what little food they had left. Her stomach rumbled. She dug through her knapsack and found a heel of stale bread and a chunk of moldy cheese. She scraped away the mold and broke off a piece. She offered it to Liam, but the wolf refused. Ayianna's exhaustion was greater than her hunger. Soon her eyelids drooped, and she gave in to the forest's demands. Again, the unseen beast hunted her, gaining on her with every stride. Its hot, hissing breath stung the back of her neck. She stumbled and fell, paralyzed. The curse would consume her as well. She would die in the forest like all the others. She glanced up. 2 glowing eyes raced toward her. The creature snarled and hissed. She screamed. "Ayianna!" a hoarse voice said as a hand shook her shoulder. She shot up from the ground, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. "Are you all right?" Desmond stood over her, concern etched into his face. She glanced around. Everyone was staring at her. "Yes, it was only a nightmare." "Are you certain?" Cale fingered the feathers of an arrow. "Don't be stupid, adding to the girl's fear like that," Desmond said. But underneath the words, his voice wavered. "You don't know what haunts this forest." Cale fitted the arrow against the bowstring. "Or how they hunt." "What do you mean?" Desmond reached for the hilt of his sword. "What did you see, Ayianna?" Cale asked. I don't know." She looked between Cale and Desmond. Her breathing and heart rate slowly returned to normal. "It was only a dream, right?" "What did you see?" "Something was chasing me. It had glowing eyes." "A tuyan mutat." "A what?" Vian leapt to his feet. He looked about the clearing as something was going to jump out and get him right then and there. "It's a creature of death, bred by Lord Stygon. A few escaped the purge after the fall of Rimoja and made Ingano their home." "Bard's tales!" Desmond slammed his fist into his palm. "Are you attempting to make us mad with fear?" Cale didn't respond. His attention diverted to the trees. Ayianna followed his gaze, afraid what she might see. The firelight flickered, slowly dying. The shadows danced, but the deeper darkness chanted of the forest's deadly secrets. "They are lazy creatures, preferring to prey on the weak and immobilize them in their sleep." Cale ventured to the edge of the small glow of their campfire and peered into the forest, his bow at the ready. "Stay awake and keep the fire going." "Where are you going?" Vian fumbled with his sword, but Cale didn't reply as he paced the perimeter of the fire's glow. Sometimes he disappeared into the darkness and then reappeared moments later. "What's he doing talking about nonsense like that?" Desmond threw a branch onto the fire and peered into the trees. The flames sparkled and sizzled. Weak. What did Cale know of her? Ayianna gritted her teeth. Liam left her side and circled the clearing. Her ears twitched back and forth, her nose to the ground and then the air. A low growl rumbled from the wolf's throat. "Liam, come here, girl." Ayianna forced the words out. The wolf loped to her side, but only for a second, and then she was off again, pacing the ground. The old forest floor crackled underfoot. Ayianna jumped. "Easy there. It's just me," Desmond said, drawing his sword. "Better stoke the fire. We don't want it going out any time soon." Ayianna dragged a couple of stray branches toward the fire and dumped them on. The flames sputtered. Liam growled. Ayianna spun around, her gaze darting from one shadow to another. 2 gleaming eyes emerged from the darkness. The rest of the creature's body remained hidden, but it blew out its breath in a low hiss. A scream lodged in her throat. She had to warn the others. She tried to speak, but her tongue refused to move. The creature stalked closer, its hissing breath growing louder. She should do something. Run, hide, scream. Instead, her limbs trembled and her knees buckled. The creature leapt from the shadows, its mottled cat-like body stretched out, sailing through the air. The creature's claws reached for her. Its mouth could have swallowed Liam whole. "Move!" Desmond catapulted himself in front of her, colliding with the beast. His sword pierced the cat's belly. The cat landed and swatted the sword away. Snarling, it lunged for Desmond, but an arrow pierced the animal's humped neck. It stumbled. "Get that fire going!" Cale bellowed as he charged into the camp, sword raised. The blade swept down and severed the creature's head from its monstrous body. Ayianna scrambled out of the way as the head flopped toward her. Coarse fur lined its face and hid its glowing eyes. The head came to a stop. Its stubby snout fell open and revealed jagged fangs. A rancid smell rushed out. She spun away and retched. Before she had finished, Desmond dragged her back toward the fire. Another beast lunged from the shadows. Cale whirled about and knocked an arrow. The bowstring twanged. The cat somersaulted through the air and landed on its side at the edge of the clearing. Desmond slashed the beast's throat, ensuring its death. Ayianna nearly vomited again. She turned away from the dead beast and closed her eyes. She took long, deep breaths until her body stopped shaking. Weak. The words sank into her heart like a branding iron. Finally, her pulse slowed and her senses returned. Sparks flew up from the fire and danced around the clearing. Shadows shifted. Had she seen something? She glanced around. She had to do something. She joined Vian in gathering the remaining wood together, but kept her eyes on the darkness beyond the old knotted trees. Cale arranged mounds of broken limbs and vines into a ring around them. The dry wood quickly caught on fire, surrounding the campsite with flames. Ayianna stared out into the darkness as several pairs of glowing eyes appeared. "Nobody sleeps tonight!" Cale yelled as he shot an arrow into the trees.